We look at the living stories. We look at the little stories that people forget. Those quick trips to the water cooler where we have that conversation and we tell what's true. I'm interested in indigenous ways of knowing, what's called living stories. I learned it from Kaylynn TwoTrees many years ago, how living stories are deeply rooted in a specific time and place, in a context, and that place has energy and meaning and aliveness. Living story is a living, breathing entity of aliveness. It takes us to a much deeper level than your corporate annual report or your CEO's speech or even these presidential speeches. A few carefully generated words of living story comes from generations of wisdoms. Living stories are more than just words on an annual report or the text. My work is all about the kinds of authentic, genuine, true storytelling and the kind of grand narratives, that linear thinking that's in so many corporate boardrooms and governments and universities. So I'm challenging the greed that is a part of our time. So with Lena Bruun and Jens Larsen, we wrote the True Storytelling book. It was published in 2021. We lay out the 7 principles of true storytelling. And these true storytelling principles are linked to living story. But here I want to talk about philosopher Jacque Derrida, who offers another angle to living story and what is true storytelling. Derrida challenges those corporate linear narratives that we talked about. I want to tell you more about this. Derrida was all about embracing ambiguity and questioning the very idea that there's any single one story of truth. Rather, living stories are fluid, ever-changing, and defy these categorizations of one true narrative. It makes space for a lot of different voices in a corporation or government. It connects back to this indigenous way of knowing living story. It's about context and aliveness. It's an understanding that stories are constantly changing and rechanging by the people that are telling them and by the shifts in the context. So we want to look at this Derrida notion of living story and indigenous living story and how we incorporate both of these in the true storytelling approach. How do we begin to grasp this way of multi-layered true storytelling? So let's get practical now. It's not about dismissing abstract narratives. We need annual reports. We need CEO speeches. We need public relations to get us out of trouble from time to time. But if we stop there, we're going to be descending into the abyss of greed. And this is where we need living stories. We need these aunties, the 7 B's, and we need the 7 true storytelling principles. And finding the balance, that's what together telling and together listening is all about in true storytelling. We need some structure to make sense of all the complexity. That's where these linear narratives do help. But we need to understand the dynamic nature of true storytelling to bring it all together. It goes beyond just telling a factual story or an opinion or the CEO story of the week. It's about the living stories that we are in the web of life, living in that web of life. It's about deep self-reflection, that 7th true storytelling principle, and going into the beyond, even a spiritual ecology. Our spiritual life that we've learned to park at the door of a corporation and when we go to work. We are bombarded by social media, all these spins, all these corporate lies, all this kind of deceptions, and we can't find the true story anymore. It's like a needle in the haystack, and that's where we need true storytelling principles. We need the anti-narrative bees, and we need to understand the living stories, both Derrida's and the Indigenous living stories. So how do we embrace this true storytelling approach? Get more authentic, more genuine, put some veracity into our storytelling. It's by engaging with the stories that are all around us. That's what I'm doing today. I'm taking on greed. Who does that anymore? It's like I'm against Monopoly, the board game. And also what it is in capitalism. What are we missing if we only focus on greed and those linear narratives, those simpleton narratives that drown out the living stories, that drown out the kind of true storytelling principles that I'm talking about today? We can discover a richer, more meaningful understanding of the world around us, and that's really important if we want to cure greed, if we want to live the true storytelling life, if we want to embrace the living stories, either by Derrida or Indigenous or the places where they overlap. And that's the important message today, that true storytelling is an amazing process with wonderful principles. Hey, send your CEO for deprogramming. Get them out of the greed and exploitation paradigm. Let them encounter life of the true storytelling and the living story. Okay, if you like this presentation, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Put a comment in. Share it with your friends. Subscribe, because I got more material coming out, and I read your comments and I make new material. So this is David Boje signing off from True Storytelling, the living story,